focus on India today.
You've been hearing all about whether Russia is about to invade Ukraine and whether this will mean the breakout of another big war in the world. Well, tensions remain high in Eastern Europe. Things are volatile. While Russia has said it will not drag negotiations for days on end, Ukraine has said it is adamant that it will continue to pursue its NATO membership, which is at the root of this entire face-off, where Russia has massed its forces on Ukraine's border with an intention to invade.
Eastern Europe continues to simmer. While Russia maintains it is ready to defuse the security situation, the country has massed a huge force within striking distance of Ukraine. Moscow insists it will not allow endless negotiations on questions that demand immediate solution.
Вы понимаете или нет, что если Украина будет в НАТО и военным путем будет возвращать себе Крым, европейские страны автоматически будут втянуты в военный конфликт с Россией. Конечно, потенциал объединенной организации НАТО и России несопоставим. Мы понимаем. Но мы также и понимаем, что Россия одна из ведущих ядерных держав. По некоторым компонентам, по современности даже многих опережает. Победителей не будет.
The US says Russia could invade Ukraine any day now. Meanwhile, Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky affirmed it will continue to pursue NATO membership despite Russia's opposition.
Ukraine's desire to join the European Union to strengthen its border for future alliance and our ambitions. You are very well aware of it. It is the country's wish. Also, there's a war in the east. We understand, and we would like NATO membership, which would be a guarantee of our security, our territorial integrity. It is enshrined in the Ukrainian legislation and Ukrainian constitution.
Zelensky also said that neither he nor his family had any plans to leave the country. Till date, Russia has positioned more than 100,000 troops near Ukraine's border, but denies any plans to invade. Western countries have already promised sanctions on an unprecedented scale if Russia does invade. The US has sent more troops to Poland and Romania. So far, there has been no clear indications from the two sides of any possible climb down. Bureau Report, India Today.
With tensions continuing to simmer at the Ukraine and Russia border, reports are to be believed Russia could invade at any time now. But what implications will they have on India? How will India's relations change with Russia and Ukraine, who it continues to have relationships with? Here's more on that.
Well, as tensions at the Russia-Ukraine border escalates, let us decode the implications it's going to have for India. Firstly, there are over 20,000 Indians in Ukraine, and in case of a war, India will have to carry out massive evacuation efforts. The war situation will also lead to a major oil crisis and price hike, which are already at a 7-year high. Oil prices hike will also hinder the recovery of the Indian economy from the pandemic. The war may also lead to the closeness of Russia with China. In such a situation, India may also get caught up in the diplomatic tussle between Russia and Ukraine.
With war clouds in the air, things are moving really rapidly. The United States is relocating its Ukraine embassy, operations from the capital Kiev to the western city of Lviv, citing a dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces. Here's the latest that we know from the ground.
The United States is relocating its Ukraine embassy operations from the capital Kiev to the western city of Lviv, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Monday, citing a dramatic acceleration in the buildup of Russian forces. The move comes as U.S. officials warn that Moscow was continuing to amass more than 100,000 troops near Russia's border with Ukraine and in neighboring Belarus, and could launch an attack at any time. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said the move is based on Russia's threatening military posture.
We are basing our assessment on what we are seeing on the ground with our own eyes, which is a continued and unprovoked Russian buildup on the border with Ukraine and no accompanying evidence of de-escalation.
Most embassy staff have already been ordered to depart Ukraine, and U.S. citizens have been advised to leave the country by commercial means. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby on Monday warned that if Russia were to attack Ukraine, there would be casualties on both sides.
Should they conduct another major military action, real lives will be at risk. Ukrainian lives, to be sure, but also Russian lives. This will not be bloodless.
Moscow denies Western accusations that it is planning an invasion. Russia suggested on Monday that it was ready to keep talking to the West to try to defuse the security crisis. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said diplomatic possibilities are far from exhausted.
As tensions continue to simmer on the streets of Ukraine, especially near the border, United States President Joe Biden has sent out a message to his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. In an hour-long conversation, Biden has urged Putin to de-escalate this ongoing face-off with Ukraine and try and indulge in diplomacy. But how has Putin answered? Take a look at this report.
U.S. President Joe Biden told Russia's Vladimir Putin during an hour-long call on Saturday that a Russian invasion of Ukraine would bring a decisive and swift response from the West. Biden also said such a move would produce widespread suffering and diminish Russia's standing in the world. The two men spoke by phone in the latest effort to avert hostilities, just a day after Washington and its allies warned a Russian invasion could happen any time. Russia continues to deny having any such plans, saying it has amassed more than 100,000 troops near the Ukrainian border to maintain its own security against aggression by NATO allies. A senior Biden administration official said the call was professional and substantive, touching on all the issues the U.S. has raised in public, but added there was no fundamental change. The official said it remains unclear whether Putin is willing to pursue a diplomatic path. Earlier on Saturday, the U.S. State Department ordered most of its embassy staff to leave Ukraine, adding to its call on Friday for private citizens to get out of the country within 48 hours. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan.
We want to be crystal clear on this point. Any American in Ukraine should leave as soon as possible, and in any event, in the next 24 to 48 hours.
The Pentagon said it was withdrawing about 150 military trainers. More countries told their citizens in Ukraine to leave the country immediately, with Israel, Portugal, and Bulgaria joining the list. Several thousand Ukrainians rallied in Kyiv on Saturday to show unity amid fears of an invasion, as Ukraine's leader Volodymyr Zelensky told people to remain calm.
The best friend for enemies, that is panic in our country. And all this information that helps only for panic doesn't help us.
In a separate call on Saturday, French President Emmanuel Macron told Putin that sincere negotiations were incompatible with an escalation in tensions over Ukraine, France said. Washington says it plans to send 3,000 extra troops to Poland, Ukraine's western neighbor, in coming days to try and help reassure NATO allies. They are in addition to 8,500 already on alert for deployment to Europe if needed, U.S. officials have said.
As we speak, hectic negotiations and parleys are underway between the Ukraine and Moscow and other NATO member states, including key European countries and, of course, the United States. But will they be able to ensure de-escalation? There are strategic and economic interests involved. Here's an explainer on why the West is a divided house, as two major Cold War enemies have massed their forces and pointed them directly at each other.
New satellite images show advanced Russian military deployments in Belarus. The country is a close Russian ally that borders Ukraine and is in close striking distance of Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Reports of possible deployment of short-range ballistic missile systems. Russia has also built its air force in Belarus. Russian fighter jets conducting air patrols along the border. Meanwhile, US troops and military vehicles have started arriving in Poland, a NATO ally that shares a border with Ukraine.
In my opinion, the most important thing today is unity and solidarity. We must show that we speak with one voice, and we must show that we are a community. We must show that we cannot be broken. And in my opinion, we must also show that we are not backing down.
But why is Eastern Europe worried that some partners and allies could back down? The United States is deploying 1,700 service members to Poland, aiming to reinforce NATO's eastern flank in Rzeszów, a city located around 100 kilometers from the Ukraine border. But will they be activated for combat?
The United States will soon move additional forces to Romania, Poland, and Germany. I want to be very clear about something. These are not permanent moves. They are moves designed to respond to the current security environment. Moreover, these forces are not going to fight in Ukraine. They are going to ensure the robust defense of our NATO allies.
The other reason is economic. The Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. Europe gets about 40% of its energy supply from Russia, and a second undersea pipeline known as Nord Stream 2 would double the amount of gas coming into Germany.
Economic assistance.
But US President Biden said the pipeline will never turn on if President Putin pursues combat in Ukraine.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Say to our American friends, we will be united, we will act together, and we will take all the necessary steps, and all the necessary steps will be done by all of us together.
But are the stakes high only for Germany? The pipeline being laid in the Baltic Sea poses political dilemma not just for Germany, but the Dutch, Austrian and French as well. The US says Putin is beginning to withhold supply himself. US Secretary Blinken calls it weaponizing heat at the height of winter. When Russia halted gas supplies to Europe over dispute with Ukraine in 2009, people died from the cold, and when energy supplies fail, economies falter. French President Emmanuel Macron is playing the role of peace broker. He traveled to Moscow to meet face-to-face with Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin and to Kiev to meet President Volodymyr Zelensky. No breakthroughs, but Macron sounded optimistic.
With President Putin yesterday, I raised the subject that we discussed for a long time, and he himself committed to respect the Minsk agreements. And I want to thank you to have very clearly confirmed to me during our exchanges your willingness to respect these same accords. This shared determination, the only path that will allow us to build a viable political solution.
Nous permettant de construire la paix, le seul chemin permettant de construire une solution politique viable.
Both sides remain committed to the Minsk Accords, aimed at ending the violence between Ukraine and Russia-backed separatists in the east.
Now, there are two things that are oft mentioned when we discuss Russia and Ukraine: the Normandy format talks and the Minsk Accord.
The Minsk Accord, or Minsk II, was brokered by France and Germany to halt the conflict that began when Russia-backed separatists seized swaths of Ukrainian territory following Russia's 2014 annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. The Accords calls for a general amnesty for the rebels, constitutional amendments giving the breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine more autonomy, handing over of Ukraine's borders to its army. The leaders of France, Germany, Russia and Ukraine gathered in Minsk to mark the occasion and issued a declaration of support. None of the clauses in the agreement has been implemented. The format of these four countries coming together is called the Normandy format. With Germany's political and economic dilemmas and France's stated policy against any NATO-based military intervention, Ukraine feels this format is heavily tilted in favor of Russia.
I repeat once again, they say in Kiev that they will fulfill the Minsk agreements. Then they say it will destroy their country. The current president recently stated that he doesn't like any points in these Minsk agreements. Whether you like it or don't, bear with it. I don't know any subject in Europe that could pressure the very powerful Russian Federation. As of now, the deoccupation of our country did not take place.
Деокупація нашої держави не відбувається поки що.
While Russia has assured it would not escalate the crisis, the West has rejected Moscow's sweeping demands, including rolling back NATO from Eastern Europe, a direct threat to Russia. But for Ukraine, it is a struggle to maintain independence and autonomy in foreign policy decisions.
Now, Russia has a massive combat force equipped with tanks, missiles, artillery, aircraft. But how do the two countries, Russia and Ukraine, stack up in conventional military capabilities? Does Ukraine have enough weapons if Russia actually invades? What are their military capabilities? India Today's Sneha Murdani explains.
Let's now talk about the military might of Ukraine versus that of Russia. Troops in Ukraine is at 11,55,000. Russia has 30,14,000. Fighter aircraft, Ukraine has 67, Russia at 1,531. Attack helicopters, Ukraine has 34, Russia has 538. Tanks, Ukraine has 2,430, Russia at 13,000. Armored vehicles, Ukraine has 11,435, Russia has 27,100. Towed artillery, Ukraine has 2,040, Russia has 4,465. What about the warships there essentially? Ukraine has 13, Russia has 214.
And choosing the channel that always covers conflict the best and first, Ukraine's envoy to India, Ambassador Igor Polika, spoken exclusively to India Today's Geeta Mohan. As the Ukraine and Russia stand perhaps on the brink of war, the Ukrainian envoy to India says the situation is difficult but not critical.
The statement that has been put out by the Indian embassy, certain Indian students are leaving. What do you have to say to the Indian students who are there? Should they stay on and monitor the situation till the time the Indian embassy asks for evacuation? Because there are certain parents who are calling their children back.
I don't take into account active diplomatic process, negotiation process, which is going on now. I don't see any immediate reason for massive evacuation or for massive panicking of the Indian students and citizens in Ukraine.
Right. Ambassador, sir, again, the German Chancellor was in Kiev. He's going to be in Moscow. Negotiations are on. How is Ukraine looking at direct negotiations to ensure, with Russia, to ensure that the matter and the tensions are under control?
Ukraine repeated many times that we are open for negotiations with Russia, with Western partners. The only way out of this difficult situation is negotiations. And Ukraine is very much ready for them. That's why I am cautiously or even optimistic that situation will start improving.
The slight bit of hopeful news on Tuesday is that many of the units and war machinery that Russia had massed along the border of Ukraine have actually reverted to their permanent positions, signaling a possible beginning of a de-escalation, but nobody wants to stretch their optimism just yet. Things are still very critical. India is closely watching these developments between the Ukraine and Russia as tensions continue to remain volatile. India has asked its citizens to leave Ukraine. The Indian mission in Ukraine has asked Indian students, especially those whose stay is not essential, to return to India as quickly as possible. The Embassy of India in capital Kyiv has been contacting Indian citizens based in Ukraine and collecting information on those who may require evacuation in case this becomes a shooting war between the two countries. Ukraine, with its high-quality medical colleges, has been a destination of choice for medical aspirants from India, and the country has more than 20,000 Indian students at present. In addition, there are also Indian professionals working in virtually all parts of Ukraine. And given how rapidly this story is escalating and moving and developing, here are the latest updates that we've been able